Akhenaten, Dweller in Truth by Naguib Mahfouz. The beginning. It all began with a glance that grew into desire as the ship pushed its way against the calm, strong current at the end of the flood season. The journey started from our city Sais, heading south towards Panopolis, where my sister had lived since her marriage. One late afternoon, our ship passed a strange city. It was bordered by the Nile to the west and an imposing mountain to the east. Its buildings hinted of a past grandeur that had given way to a haunting evanescence. The roads were empty, the trees were leafless. The gates and windows closed like eyelids of the dead. A city devoid of life, inert, possessed by silence, shadowed by gloom and the spirit of death. I was dismayed at the sight of it, and I hurried to my father, who was seated, crowned with the dignity of old age, on a bench on a ship's deck. "Father, what is wrong with this city?" "Amun, this is the city of the heretic, the cursed and infidel city," he replied calmly. I looked again with increasing excitement as the memories flowed. "Does no one live here?" "That woman, the heretic's wife, she still lives in her palace, or prison, I should say. And there must be a few guards." "Nefertiti," I mumbled to myself, remembering and wondering how she had endured her isolation. Visions from my boyhood at my father's palace in Sais kept coming to me, of the elders' fervent debates about the whirlwind that had devastated Egypt and the whole empire. They called it the War of the Deities. I remembered the stories about the young pharaoh who had rejected his ancestors' heritage, challenged the priests, and defied destiny. I recalled those hushed voices, the talk of a new religion, and the people's bewilderment. Unable to choose between their old faith and their loyalty to the pharaoh, people argued about unusual events, the terrible defeat of the empire, then the triumphs, followed by grief. So here was the city of wonders, possessed by the spirit of death, and there was its mistress, a solitary prisoner, slipping bitterness. My heart beat fast, desperate to learn the whole story. "You will never accuse me of meekness hereafter, father. I am swept by a sacred desire, strong as the northern winds, as a desire to know the truth and record it, as you did in the prime of your youth." He glanced with me with weary eyes and said, "What is it that you want, Amun?" "I want to learn everything about the city and its ruler, about the tragedy that ripped the country apart and laid waste to the empire." "But you heard everything in the temple," he replied. "Father, the sage Kakimna said, 'Pass no judgment upon a matter until you have heard all testimonies.' But the truth in this case is evident. Besides, Akhenaten, the heretic, is dead." "Most of his contemporaries are alive, though," I replied with growing excitement. "And they are your peers and friends. An introduction from you, father, would help open doors and reveal secrets to me. Then I could see the many facets of truth before it perishes, like this city." I insisted until finally he granted me his approval, possibly with concealed enthusiasm, for father himself had a passion for knowledge and recording the truth, a fact that made our palace a gathering point for men of both worldly and religious affairs. Our palace was famous for its forums, where stories were narrated and poetry recited, and for the great banquets of delicious duck and fine wines. Father was known among his friends as a man blessed with unique wisdom and abundant land. He handed me some letters to deliver to the notable people who remembered that time, those who had participated closely or from afar, and those who had experienced its bitterness as well as its sweetness. "You have chosen your path, so walk it. May the gods protect you," said father. "Your forefathers sought war, politics, or trade, but you, Amun, you seek the truth instead, and one's cause ranks as high as the determination vested in it. Be careful not to provoke the powerful, or gloat over the misfortune of those who have fallen into oblivion. Be like history, impartial, and open to every witness, then deliver a truth that is free of bias for those who wish to contemplate it. I was happy to bid indolence farewell, and to set off along the path of history in search of truth, a path that has no beginning and no end, for it will always be extended by those who have a passion for eternal truth. The High Priest of Amun. Thebes had returned to prosperity after its terrible desertion by the heretic. Once more, it was the capital of the empire, its throne graced by the young pharaoh Tutankhamun. Men of peace and war returned to their positions, and the priests resumed their duties in the temples. Palaces were restored, gardens blossomed, and the temple of Amun regained its grandeur and stood proudly with its giant columns and flowering garden. The markets were filled with buyers, merchants, and goods, and the stream of wealth flowed continuously. The city was now a marvel of glory. It was my first venture to Thebes. I was dazzled by its brilliant architecture and amazed by its vast population. I was overwhelmed by the sounds of the city and the sight of its roads, busy with carriages and carts. In comparison, my city Sais seemed like a small, quiet, obscure village. I reached the temple of Amun at the appointed time. A servant ushered me through the hall of the grand columns and into a lateral corridor leading to the room where the high priest waited me. I saw him in the center of the room, seated on a chair of ebony with armrests of pure gold. He was an elderly man with a shaved head and was dressed in long, flowing skirt, while a white sash wrapped around his chest and shoulders. Despite his advantaged age, he was a man of vigor and had a confident heart. He honored my father at the mention of his name and praised his loyalty. Those times of adversity helped us recognize men of good will like your father, he said. Then he murmured a few compliments regarding my endeavor and continued. We have destroyed the walls with all the false inscriptions they bore. The truth, however, must be recorded. He leaned his head forward in gratitude. Now Amun sits prosperously on his throne and in the Holy of Holies. Master of all deities, protecting Egypt and fighting off its enemies. His priests, too, have regained their precedence. Amun liberated our valley by the power he vested in Ahmose, and extended our empire in every direction by the power he vested in Thutmose III, for he grants victory to whom he wishes, and humbles those who betray him. I knelt in reverence until he called on me to rise and be seated on a chair before him. I listened carefully as the high priest spoke. It is a very sad story, Amun, though in the beginning it seemed merely an innocent whisper. It started with the great queen Tiye, the heretic's mother and the wife of the great pharaoh Amenhotep III. She came from a common Nubian family, with not a drop of royal blood in her veins, yet she was shrewd and powerful, as though she had 4 eyes and could see in all directions at once. She was intent on maintaining friendly relations with us. I shall never forget her words on the day of the Nile festival. You priests of Amun are the fortune and the blessing of Egypt. She was so strong that she could stare with her beautiful big eyes into the faces of powerful men till they lowered their gaze in embarrassment. We, however, did not regard her with apprehension, for we knew how the pharaohs of this glorious family had always cherished and supported the priests of Amun. Then the queen declared an interest in broadening the scope of theological doctrine to encompass other deities, and in particular, Aten. On one level, it appeared as a mere expansion in the knowledge of religions that we all respected and held sacred. There was no sense in protesting, although we were displeased that the other deities should attain such merit here in Thebes, the home of Amun. Tia assured us that Amun would forever remain the master of all deities, and that his priests would rank above all others in Egypt. But her words did not appease us. One day, Toto, the chanter priest, said to me, "I detect behind the queen's decision a new policy that has nothing to do with religion." When I queried his statement, he continued, "The great queen is seeking the sympathy of the provincial priesthood in order to curb us, limit our power, and strengthen that of the sovereign. But we are the servants of Amun, and in service of the people. We are the teachers, the healers, and the guides in this world and the hereafter. The queen is a wise woman. She must acknowledge our merits," I replied. "But this is a power struggle. The queen is ambitious. In my opinion, she is more powerful than the king," he said irritably. "But we are the sons of the greatest deity. We are backed by a heritage stronger than destiny," I argued against my own misgivings. Maybe at this point I should tell you about the king Amenhotep III. His grandfather, Thutmose III, had established an empire that surpassed all others in its vastness and the multitude of its peoples. Amenhotep III was a powerful king. He rose to the defense of his country at the slightest alarm, and achieved such triumphs that the whole empire gave him allegiance. Peace and wealth prevailed throughout his long reign, and he cultivated the fruits of his forefathers' work: crops, minerals, fabrics, and goods. Everything was abundant in Egypt, but his wife Tia knew his strengths and weaknesses and used them to good effect. She encouraged him to fight at times of war, and tolerated his philandering, sacrificing her feminine emotions in order to share his throne and pursue her boundless ambition. I do not deny her the merit of knowing every detail of the empire's affairs, nor do I question her loyalty and farsightedness, or her concern for the glory of Egypt. But I do condemn her greed for power. It was greed that tempted her to exploit religion to attain exclusive power for the throne and marginalize the priests. Gradually, I became aware of other ideas that occupied her mind. One day she came to the temple after making her offering to Amun, preceded me with firm stride to the reception hall. As soon as we were seated, she asked, "What is that worries you?" Before I could think of an answer, she continued quickly, "Like the priests, I can hear what is buried deep in people's hearts. You suspect that I have raised the status of other priests to the disadvantage of the priests of Amun. The priests of Amun are loyal subjects of your glorious family," I replied. "Here is what I think," she said, her eyes glaring as she continued. "Amun is the master of all deities in Egypt. For our citizens in the empire, he is a symbol of power. They fear him. But Aten shines for everyone. He is the sun god, and anyone can embrace him." I wondered if she was sincere, or whether it was just another pretense making her desire to neutralize her power. In any case, I was not convinced by the argument itself. "Your Highness," I said, "those savages must be ruled by force, not compassion." "By compassion, too," she replied with a smile. "What is appropriate for a wild beast is not always suitable for the tamed animal." This seemed to me a futile, womanish concept that might very well have disastrous consequences, and I was proven right by the painful events that followed. The high priest was silent for a while as he gathered his thoughts. Then he continued. At the beginning of her marriage, Tia forced some difficulties. She remained childless for a considerable time, and she feared she might be barren, particularly since she came from a common family. But by the virtue of Amun and his priests, our good prayers and effective sorcery, the queen became pregnant. Even then, she gave birth to a girl. Whenever I met her in the palace or the temple, she would look at me with wariness and suspicion, as though I was responsible for her misfortune. We would never have thought of disturbing the order of the throne. It was the queen's own wickedness that had made her so distrustful. Once more he was silent, as though reluctant to continue. Then he said, "Then in some mysterious way she bore 2 sons." He thought a while, setting my curious soul on fire. The older and the better of the 2 sons passed away, while the other remained to exercise his perversity in the destruction of Egypt. I said nothing, but the high priest noticed my eagerness and went on. "We have ways of hunting out the truth, even when it's hidden from others. We have the power of sorcery, and our eyes are everywhere in the empire. The heretic was a man of questionable birth, effeminate and grotesque. Following in the footsteps of his father, Amenhotep III, he married a common girl. Nefertiti was like his mother, not only in humble descent, but also in her insatiable ambition and lust. She was beautiful, stubborn, and defiant. She plunged into the affairs of the country, supporting her husband's destructive policy. She bore 6 girls, the fruit of her liaisons with other men. Despite his apparent love for Nefertiti, Akhenaten never really loved anyone but his mother, who gave him life and nurtured his absurd ideas. He sensed Ti's pain and loneliness, and harbored rage against his father. When Amenhotep III died, Akhenaten erased his name from all the monuments. He said he meant to erase the name of Amun from the people's memory, and to do that, his father's name, Amenhotep, meaning Amun is content, had also to be erased. The truth is, having failed to avenge himself during his father's life, he killed him after his death. When Ti taught him the religion of Aten, it was merely a political maneuver. But the boy believed in it as an end in itself. Politics did not benefit his feminine nature. What happened next was something even his mother had not anticipated. He became a heretic. I still remember his repulsive appearance, neither man nor woman. Because he was so weak and frail, he naturally became resentful of all strong men, priests, and deities. He conceived of a god similar to himself in weakness and femininity, both father and mother, with no purpose but love, a god worshipped with rituals of dance and song. Akhenaten drowned in a swamp of foolishness, and neglected his obligations to the throne, while our men and loyal allies were being massacred by the enemies of the empire. Though they cried for help, they received none, and eventually the empire was lost. Egypt was destroyed, the temples were empty, and the people famished. That was the heretic who called himself Akhenaten. Overwhelmed by the intensity of his memories, the high priest was silent for a while. He waited patiently until at last he laced his fingers and rested his hands in his lap. I first received reports about Akhenaten when he was still a young boy. I had my eyes in the palace, men who had dedicated themselves to the service of Amun and the country. They told me that the crown prince nurtured a suspicious affinity for Aten, favoring him over Amun, masters of all deities. I learned that every day at dawn the boy went to a secluded spot on the Nile bank to greet the sunrise in solitude. I foresaw in his strange practices a future laden with trouble. I went to the palace, where I confessed my fears to the king and queen. "My son is still young," Amenhotep smiled. "But the young boy will grow, and he will retain within him the ideas of his childhood. He is just but an innocent child seeking wisdom wherever he thinks he might find it," Ti said. "Soon he will begin his military training and learn his true calling," the pharaoh added. "We have no need for more countries to add to our empire. What we need is the wisdom to keep what we already have, Ti said. My glorious queen, I argued, the safety of the empire relies on the blessings of Amun and the exercise of power. I am surprised that a wise man like you should undervalue the role of wisdom in such a manner, said the cunning queen. I do not deny the importance of wisdom, I insisted, but without power, wisdom is nothing but chatter. In this palace, the pharaoh interjected, there is no question that Amun is the master of all deities. But the prince has stopped visiting the temple, I said anxiously. Be patient, the king replied. Soon my son will fulfill all his obligations as crowned prince. I returned from the palace with no solace indeed. After hearing the king and queen come to the prince's defense, my fears were even stronger. Then I heard about a conversation that the crowned prince had with his parents, and I became convinced that within the prince's frail body was an abyss of evil power. One day, one of my men asked me to see me. Even the sun is no longer a god, he said. I queried him, and he continued. There are rumors that a new god has revealed himself to the crown prince, claiming to be the one and the only true god, and that all other deities are spurious. The news stunned me. The fate of the older brother who had died was more merciful than the madness that had descended upon the crown prince. The tragedy had reached its climax. Are you certain of what you say? I'm merely reporting what everyone says. How did this so-called god reveal himself to the prince? He heard his voice. No sun, no star, no idols, nothing at all. How can he worship what he cannot see? He believes that this god is the only power capable of creation. He has lost his mind. The chanter priest, Todo, said, The prince has gone mad and is no longer fit to take the throne when the time comes. Quiet, I said. That the prince is an infidel and does not change the fact that Amun and our gods will remain the only deities worshipped by the people in the empire. How can a heretic take the throne and rule the empire? Todo asked angrily. Let us not be hasty. We will wait until the truth is clear, then we will discuss the matter with the king, I continued, my heart heavy with gloom. It will be the first confrontation of its kind in history. When the crown prince married Nefertiti, the eldest daughter of the sage, I held by the last of all hopes that in marriage the prince would return to his senses. I summoned Ai to the temple. As we talked, it became clear to me that the sage was extremely cautious in what he said. He was certainly in a predicament, and I sympathized with him, saying nothing about the prince's unbelief. Before I left, I asked him to arrange for me a private conference with his daughter. Nefertiti arrived promptly. I looked at her nearly and saw beyond her captivating beauty a roaring torrent of strength and power. I was instantly reminded of the great Queen Ti, and hoped this power would work with us and not against us. I grant you my blessing, my daughter. She expressed her gratitude in a sweet, pleasing voice. I have no doubt that you are fully aware of your duties as the wife of the crown prince. But it is also my duty to remind you that the throne of the empire is founded on 3 fundamentals: Amun, the master of all deities, the pharaoh, and the queen. Indeed, I am fortunate to be granted the honor of your wisdom. A sensible queen must bear with the king the burden of protecting the empire. Dear holy priest, she said firmly, my heart is filled with love and loyalty. Egypt is a country of timeless traditions, and women are the sacred guardians of this heritage. Duty, too, dwells within me. Nefertiti remained wary and reserved throughout her visit. She spoke, but revealed nothing. She was like a mysterious carving with no inscription to explain it. I could extract no information from her words, nor could I express my fears discreetly. Yet her wariness meant that she knew everything and that she was not on our side. Her position did not surprise me in the least. By a stroke of luck capable of turning the strongest head in the country, Nefertiti had found herself a future queen. Her primary concerns was neither Amun nor, indeed, any of the deities. She craved only the power of the throne. I said a prayer of mourning with the other priests in the Holy of Holies, then related to them the proceedings of my meeting with Nefertiti. "Soon there will be nothing but darkness," said Todo the chanter. When all the other priests had left, Todo said, "Perhaps you can discuss the matter with Chief Commander Mei." "Todo," I replied earnestly, recognizing the danger in his allusion. "We cannot defy King Amenhotep III and the great Queen Tiye." Meanwhile in the palace, tension was rising between the mad prince and his parents. Thus King Amenhotep III issued an imperial mandate ordering the crown prince to tour the vast empire. Perhaps the pharaoh had hoped that when the prince became acquainted with his country and subjects, he would see the reality of things and realize how far he strayed from the right path. I was grateful for the king's attempt, but my deep fears continued to haunt me. Then, while the prince was still away, some grave events took place. First, Queen Tiye gave birth to two twins, Smenkhkare and Tutankhamun. Shortly after, the pharaoh's health deteriorated, and he died. Messengers from the palace carried the news to the prince, for him to return and take the throne. I discussed the future of the country with the priests of Amun, and we came to an agreement. Immediately, I took action, and asked to meet the queen despite the mourning and her preoccupation with mummifying her husband's body. Even in her grave, the queen was powerful and enduring. I was determined to speak out at any cost. "My queen, I came to speak my mind to the rightful matriarch of the empire." I could tell by the way she looked at me that she knew what I was about to say. "My gracious queen, it is well known now that the crown prince does not respect our deities." "I do not believe everything you hear," she replied. "I am prepared to believe all that you say, your majesty," I said readily. "He was a poet," she said. I was not satisfied with her answer, but remained silent until she added, firmly, "He will fulfill all his duties." I mustered up the courage I had within me and said, "My queen is surely aware of the consequences that would befall the throne if the gods were offended." "Your fears are unfounded," she replied irritably. "If necessity calls, we can entrust the throne to one of your younger sons. He will be the guardian regent. Amenhotep IV will rule the empire. He is the crown prince." Thus the wise queen yielded to the mother and lover in her. She wasted the last chance for reparation, and armed destiny with the weapon that dealt us a fatal blow. The mad, effeminate crown prince returned in time for the royal entombment. Soon afterward, I was summoned to appear before him in his formal capacity as the future pharaoh. It was the first time I had seen him so closely. He was rather dark, with dreamy eyes and a thin, frail figure, noticeably feminine. His features were grotesque and disturbing. He was a despicable creature, unworthy of the throne, so weak he could not challenge an insect, let alone the master deity. I was disgusted, but revealed nothing. Instead, I called to mind the words of wise men and great poets, words that inspired me to keep my patience. He fixed his gaze on me, a look neither hostile nor friendly. I was so distracted by his appearance that I could not utter a word. "I've had so many tedious arguments with my parents. Because of you," he began. I was finally able to speak. "My only concern in this life," I said, "is the service of Amun, the throne, and the empire." "You have something to tell me, no doubt," he said. "My king," I replied, anticipating a battle. I heard disturbing news, but I did not believe it. What you heard is the truth, he said, seemingly quite unconcerned. I was startled, but he continued, I'm the only man of faith in this heathen country. I cannot believe what I hear. You must believe it. There is no God but the one and only God. Amun will not forgive this blasphemy. I was so enraged that I no longer cared about the consequences of what I said. My only concerns was to defend Amun and our deities. No one but the one and only God can grant forgiveness, he replied, smiling. Nonsense, I said, shuddering with anger. He is the whole meaning of this world. He is the creator. He is the power. He is love, peace, and happiness. Then he threw me a piercing look that seemed out of keeping with his fragile appearance, and continued, I call upon you to believe in him. Beware of the wrath of Amun, I said furiously. He creates and he destroys. He grants and he disposes. Aids and forsakes. Fear his vengeance, for it shall haunt you to the last of descendant, and destroy your throne and the empire. I am but a child in the vast expanse of the one and only, a budding flower in his garden, and a servant at his command. He granted me his gracious love, and revealed himself to my soul. He granted me with brilliant light and beautiful music. That is all that matters to me. A prince does not become a pharaoh until he is crowned in the temple of Amun. I shall be crowned in the open land under the sunlight, with the blessings of the Creator. We parted on the poorest terms. On my side, there was Amun and his followers. Akhenaten had the heritage of his great family, the holiness with which all subjects regarded their pharaohs, and his madness. I prepared myself for holy war, and was ready to sacrifice everything for the sake of Amun and my country. I put myself to work without delay. The new pharaoh is a heretic, I told my priests. You must know that, and let everyone in the country be informed. I too was furious, but I thought it best to channel Toto's anger. I proposed that he should pretend to join the heretic, to become our eyes in the palace. As for the king, he, too, lost no time. He was crowned with the blessings of his so-called god. He even built a temple for him in Thebes, the city of Amun. He proclaimed his new religion to the candidates for his chamber, and consequently the finest men of Egypt declared their faith in the new god. Their particular motives may have varied, but the goal was one: to fulfill their ambition and attain power. Perhaps if they renounced his religion, things would have taken a different course. But they sold themselves like whores. Take the sage Ai, for instance. He thought himself a part of the pharaoh's family and was blinded by glory. Haremhab, a courageous warrior, was another one. He was a man of no faith. For him, it was simply a matter of substituting one name for another. All the others, too, they were nothing but a band of hypocrites, hungry for wealth and power. Had they not renounced their sinful ways and repented at the crucial moment, they would have deserved to die. In the event, they won their lives back, but I have no respect for any of them. The conflict threatened Thebes. People were torn between their loyalty to Amun and their obligation to the mad offshoot of the greatest family in our history. The great Queen Ti was consumed with the worry. She watched the seed she had sown grown into a poisonous plant. She was falling into a bottomless pit, dragging his family along with him. Ti kept bringing her offerings to the temple of Amun in an attempt to diminish the turmoil that jeopardized the throne. You win by allegiance and lose by defiance, she said. You are asking us to be loyal to a heretic. If only you had listened to me in the beginning. We must not despair. Her usual strength collapsed in the face of his mysterious insanity, and she was impotent before her effeminate, spoilt son. It was inevitable that we continue our holy struggle. The Mad King was no longer able to bear the pressure in Thebes, particularly when he heard the hostile cries of the people during the feast of Amun. Claiming that his god had commanded him to leave Thebes and build a new city, he left in a grand exodus with 80,000 other heretics to live in their accursed city. His move from Thebes gave us time to prepare for holy war, and allowed him to indulge his blasphemy and make the new capital a place for righteous festivals and orgies. Love and joy. This was the slogan of his new nameless god. Wherever his natural weakness stung him, he went to extremes to prove that his power had no limits. The priests were evicted and the temples closed. The idols and all the patriarchal endowments were confiscated. I said to the priests, "It is death and the hereafter you must cherish, for there is nothing to live for now that the temples are closed." But we found refuge in the homes of the pious followers of Amun. They were our fighters, and we continued the struggle with hope and determination. The heretic continued to flaunt his power, parading in the provinces and calling upon the people to join him in his heresy. Those were the darkest days. The people were torn and dismayed, not knowing whether to choose their deities or their feeble king and his obscenely beautiful wife. Those were the days of grief and torment, hypocrisy and regret, and fear of divine wrath. But the words of love and joy began to take their toll. The public servants cared little for their duties and exploited citizens for their pleasure. Rebellion spread throughout the empire. Our enemies feared us no more and began to threaten our borders. When the rulers in the provinces called for help, they received poems instead of troops. They died as martyrs, cursing the treacherous heretic with their final breath. The stream of riches that had flown into Egypt from all over the world dried up, leaving the markets bare, the merchants impoverished, and the country famished. I cried out to the people, "The curse of Amun has descended upon us. We must destroy the heretic, or else we will be extinguished in war." I still opted for the path of peace to spare the country the trauma of war. I confronted the Queen Mother, Ti. "I am troubled and grieved. High Priest of Amun," she said. "I am no longer High Priest." Bitterness grasped me. I am only a haunted vagabond now. "I asked the gods for mercy," she stuttered. "You must do something. He is your son. He adores you. You are responsible for all that has happened. Caution him before a civil war wipes out everything." She was vexed when I reminded her of the responsibility, she said. "I have decided to go to the new capital, Akhenaten." Indeed, Queen Ti made some deserving efforts, but she could not repair the damage. I did not despair, but went to Akhenaten, despite the danger in such undertaking. There I met with the heretic's men. "I speak to you from a position of power," I said. "My men are awaiting a signal from me to pounce on you. I am here now in a last attempt to save what can possibly be saved without bloodshed or destruction. I will leave you to yourselves for a while, and trust you will come to your senses and do your duty." They appeared to be convinced, and in due time they did what I asked them, each of their own purposes, but the country was spared grave affliction. They met with the heretic and presented him two urgent demands: to declare freedom of worship and to send an army to defend the empire against our enemies who were making incursions across the borders. The Mad King refused. They proposed that if he abdicated the throne, he could keep his faith and preach it however he wished. Again, their offer was rejected. But this time, he appointed his brother, Smekhkare, to share the throne. We disregarded this in order and named Tutankhamun king of the throne. The heretic's men deserted him and pledged allegiance to the new pharaoh. In time, order was restored to the country without war or destruction. We relinquished the desire for revenge on the madman and his wife, and those who remained loyal to him. Amun's followers hurried to the temples after their long deprivation. The nightmare had ended and life began to resume its normal course. As for the heretic, when madness had consumed him, he fell ill and died. Disappointed in his gods and hopeless of the hereafter, he left behind him his wicked wife to endure loneliness and regret. The high priest gazed at me silently for a long time. Then he said, "We are still healing. We need time and serious effort. Our loss, inside and outside the empire, was beyond estimate. How did this all happen? How could such a mad, distorted person stir up such agony?" He paused for a moment, then continued, "That is the truth story. Recorded it faithfully. Do carry my sincere greetings to your dear father." I was the sage and former counselor to Akhenaten, and the father of Nefertiti and Mutnanjamet. Old age had settled in the furrows of his face. I met him in his palace overlooking the Nile in South Thebes. He told me the story in a serene voice without letting his face reveal any emotion. I was in awe of his solemnity and dignity, and the richness of his experience. "Life, Amun, is a wonder," he began. "It is a sky laden with clouds of contradictions." He contemplated a while, surrendering to a current of memories. Then he continued. "The story begins one summer day when I was summoned to appear before King Amenhotep III and great Queen Ti. 'You are a wise man, the queen said. "Your knowledge of the secular and the spiritual is unrivaled. We have decided to entrust you with the education of our sons, Tutmosis and Amenhotep." I bowed my shaven head in gratitude and said, "Fortunate is he who will have the honor of serving the king and the queen." Tutmosis was 7 years old. Amenhotep was 6. Tutmosis was strong, handsome, and well-built, though not particularly tall. Amenhotep was dark, tall, and slender, with small feminine features. He had a tender yet penetrating look that made a deep impression on me. The handsome lad died, and the weak one was spared. The death of his brother shook Amenhotep, and he wept for a long time. One day he said to me, "Master, my brother was pious. He frequented the temple of Amun, received his charms and fetishes, but still he was left to die. Master and sage, why don't you bring him back to life?" "Son," I replied, "one's soul is immortal. Let that be your solace." That was the beginning of our many discussions on life and death. I was sincerely pleased with his insight and understanding in spiritual matters. The boy was clearly ahead of his years. I often found myself thinking that Akhenaten was born with some otherworldly wisdom. Even in secular subjects, he quickly mastered the skills of reading, writing, and algebra. I said to Queen Ti, "His abilities are so extraordinary that he is beginning to intimidate his master." I looked forward to lessons with him and wondered what his mind would produce when he reigned over the empire of his forefathers. I was certain that the greatness of his empire would surpass that of his fathers. Amenhotep III was a great and powerful ruler. He was merciless with his enemies and those who disobeyed him. In peaceful times, he indulged himself with women, food, and wine. He became so thoroughly consumed by those pleasures that he soon fell victim to all kinds of ailments, and spent his last days in agony, suffering excruciating pains. As for Queen Ti, she came from an honorable Nubian family. She proved to be a woman of such power and wisdom that she outshone even Queen Hatshepsut. Because the death of her eldest son and her husband's infidelity, she became very attached to the young Amenhotep. It was as if she were his mother, his lover, his teacher. She was so passionate about politics that she sacrificed her feminine heart to nourish her ambition for power. The priests falsely accused her of being responsible for her son's perversity. The truth is that she wanted him to be abreast of all religions. Perhaps she wanted Aten to replace Amun, and become the deity to whom all others owed allegiance. For Aten was the sun god who breathed life everywhere. His subjects were united by faith and not merely by force. She hoped to use religion as a political instrument that could bring about the unity in Egypt. It was not her intention that her son believe in the religion and not the politics, but Akhenaten refused to put religion in the service of anything. The mother had contrived a clever political scheme, but the son believed in the means, not the end. He devoted himself to his religious calling, jeopardizing the country, the empire, and the throne. I remained silent for a while. He tightened the sash around his shoulders. His face looked rather small under his thick wig. When some time had passed in silence, he continued, "I am still amazed at the young boy's intelligence. It was as if he had been born with the mind of a high priest. I often caught myself arguing with him as though he were my equal. By the time he was 10, his mind was like a hot spring, sparkling with ideas. His weak body harbored such a strong will and perseverance that I took him as living proof that the human spirit could be stronger than the most exercised muscles. He was so devoted to his religious instruction that he spent no time preparing himself for the throne. He would not accept any idea without questioning and argument, and he never hesitated to express his doubts about many of our traditional teachings. I was taken aback when one time he said, 'Thebes, a holy city, isn't that what they claim?' Thebes, master, is nothing but a den of rapacious merchants, debauchery, and fornication. Who were those great priests? They delude people with superstition and take from the poor what little they have. They seduce women in the name of the deities. Their temple has become a house of harlotry and sin. Accursed Thebes!' I was greatly concerned when I heard him speak these words. I could see accusing fingers pointing at me. His teacher, 'Those priests are in the foundation of the throne,' I replied. 'The throne is built on lies and disillusion. Their power is no less than that of an army,' I warned him. 'Bandits and thugs are powerful too.' It was clear from the very beginning that he disliked Amun, who reigned in the Holy of Holies. He favored Aten, whose light shone throughout the world. Amun is the god of priests, but Aten is a god of heaven and earth. You should be loyal to all deities. Should I not trust my heart to show me the difference between right and wrong?" he asked. "One day you will be crowned in the temple of Amun," I said in an attempt to persuade him. He spared his slender arms and said, "I would rather be crowned in the open air under the light of the sun. Amun is the deity that empowered your ancestors and gave them victory over their enemies." He remained quiet, thinking, then said, "I cannot understand how a god could allow anyone to massacre his own creation." I grew more worried, but continued my efforts to dissuade him. "But we, the subjects of Amun, cannot always understand his holy wisdom. The sunlight of Aten does not discriminate between people when it shines down upon us. You must not forget that the life is a battleground." "Master," he replied sadly, "do not speak to me of war. Have you not seen the sun when it rises above the fields of the Nile? Have you not seen the horizon when the sun goes down? Have you heard the nightingale sing or the doves coo? Have you never felt the sacred happiness buried deep in your heart?" I knew that there was nothing I could do. He was like a tree, and I could not stop him from growing. I conveyed my fears to the queen, but she did not share my concerns. "He is still an innocent child, she said. "He will learn more of this life as he grows. Soon he will begin his military training." The pious young prince started his military training along with the sons of the nobles. He detested it, possibly because of his physical weakness. Soon he rejected the training, thus admitting a failure not befitting a king's son. "I do not wish to learn the fundamentals of murder," he said bitterly. The king was saddened by his son's decision. "A king who cannot fight is at the mercy of his commanders," he said. The crown prince and the king had several confrontations. Most likely, this strife was the seed of malice the boy harbored against his great father. I do believe, however, that the priests of Amun stretched this fact when they accused him of avenging himself by erasing his father's name from all the monuments. He only wanted to eradicate the name of Amun. He even changed his own name from Amenhotep to Akhenaten for the same purpose. Then came the night that condemned him to the life of seclusion. He had been waiting for the sunrise in the dark royal garden by the bank of the Nile. I learned all the details when I met him in the morning. I believe it was springtime. The air was clear of all dew and dust. When I greeted him, he turned to me with a pale face and mesmerized eyes. "Master, the truth has been revealed to me," he said without returning my greeting. "I came here before sunrise. The night was my companion, its silence my blessing. As I bid darkness farewell, I felt that I was rising with the air around me. It was as though I was retreating with the night. Then there was a marvelous light, and I saw the creatures that I had seen or even heard of gather before my eyes and greet each other in delight. I had overcome the pain and death, I thought. I was intoxicated with the sweet scent of creation. I heard his clear voice speaking to me. I am the one and only God. There is no God but I. I am the truth. Dwell in my kingdom, and worship me only. Give me yourself. I have granted you my divine love." We stared at each other for a long while. I was overcome by despair and could not speak. "Do you not believe me, master?" "You never lie," I replied. "Then you must believe me," he said in ecstasy. "What did you see?" I only heard his voice in the merry dawn. "My son," I hesitated. "If you saw nothing, that means there was nothing." "This is how he reveals himself," he replied firmly. "Perhaps it was Aten." "No, not Aten, not the sun. He is above and beyond that. He is the one and only God." I was mystified. "Where do you worship him?" "Anywhere, anytime. He will give me the strength and love to worship him." I was silent. I wanted to ask him if he believed in Akhenaten's God, but I remembered my father's advice and remained silent. I, along with many others, had left Akhenaten when things were at their worst. Perhaps he had been forced to deny his faith for the rest of his life. I had to tell the king and queen a few days later. I found the crown prince waiting for me in his favorite part of the garden. "You reported me as usual, master," he smiled reproachfully. "It is my duty," I replied calmly. He laughed and said, "The confrontation with my father was rather interesting." When I recounted my experience to him, he grimaced and said, "You must be examined by Bento, the physician." I replied politely that I was in good health. "I have yet to see a madman confess to insanity," he said. Then he continued, this time in a threatening tone. "The deities are the foundations of Egypt. The king must believe in all the deities of his people. This God that you spoke of is nothing. He does not deserve to join our deities." I told him that he was the only God, that there was no other God. "This is heresy and madness," he cried. I repeated that he was the one and only God. He became extremely angry and said, "I command you to renounce these absurd ideas, and to honor the heritage of your ancestors." I did not say any more, so as to not show him disrespect. Then my mother said, "All we ask of you is to honor and respect the holy duty. Let your heart love what your heart wishes to love, until you return to the right path. Meanwhile, do not neglect your duty." I left them feeling sad, but more determined. "My dear prince," I said earnestly, "the pharaoh is a product of ancient and holy traditions. Do not ever forget that." From that moment, I was sure that there was troubles ahead such as Egypt had never seen or imagined before. The great family of pharaohs that had liberated the country and created an empire was now standing at the edge of an abyss. Around that time, perhaps it was earlier. I am not quite certain of the chronology. I was summoned to a closed meeting by the high priest of Amun. "You and I have known each other for a very long time, he said. "What is all this that I hear?" As I say, I do not recall whether this meeting took place after it became known that the prince was inclined towards Aten, or after he declared his faith in the one and only God. In any event, I replied, the prince is fine, sensible young man. Only, he is still too young. At such a sensitive age, one tends to follow one's imagination indiscriminately. He will soon mature and return to the right path. How could he renounce the wisdom of the best teacher in the country? How can one control the flow of a river during the flood season? I said in an effort to defend myself. Our duty as the elite of this country is to put our religion and empire first. I had endless discussions with my wife, Tay, and my daughters, Nefertiti and Mutanjamet, trying to make sense of the confusion that rattled in my mind day and night. Tay and Mutanjamet accused the prince of heresy. Nefertiti, on the other hand, had no qualms about supporting him. Indeed, she liked his ideas. He speaks the truth, father, she whispered. Nefertiti was about the same age as Akhenaten and, like the prince, had matured beyond her years. Both girls had completed their basic education and homemaking training. Mutanjamet was good at writing and recitation, algebra, embroidery, sewing, cooking, painting, and ritual dance. Nefertiti excelled in the same subjects, but was not content with them. She developed a strong interest in theology and logic. I noted her fondness for Aten, and later, she declared her faith in the one God. I was aghast. He is the only God able to rescue me from the torture of confusion, she announced. Tay and Mutanjamet were furious and accused her of apostasy. At that time, we were invited to the pharaoh's palace to celebrate 30 years of his reign. It was the first time our daughters had entered the palace, and by a stroke of fate, Nefertiti won the love of the crown prince. Everything happened so quickly thereafter. We could still hardly believe it. When Nefertiti and Akhenaten became husband and wife, I was summoned once more by the high priest of Amun. This time, as I stood before him, I felt that he regarded me as a potential enemy. You have become a member of the royalty, His voice was filled with apprehension. I am but a man who has never strayed from the course of duty. Only time can prove the true merits of man, he said calmly. He asked me to arrange for a conference with Nefertiti. Before the appointed time, I spoke with my daughter and armed her with advice. I must say that Nefertiti has no need of counseling. Her own wisdom aided her more than any advice she received. She answered the high priest's questions eloquently, without revealing secrets or making commitments. I believe that the priest's hostility towards my daughter started with that encounter. Father, she reported, it may have seemed an innocent meeting on the surface, but in reality, we were fighting an undeclared war. He claims that he is concerned for the empire, when in fact he is only worried about the share of the goods that flow into the temple. He is a crafty, wicked man. When the conflict grew between the pharaoh and his son, the king called me in and said, I think we should send the prince on a tour of the empire. He needs experience and needs to learn more about people and life. At that time, the king was enjoying his last days with a bride young enough to be his granddaughter, Tadukhiba, daughter of Tushrada, the king of Mitanni. It is a sound idea, my gracious king, I replied sincerely. So Akhenaten left Thebes, accompanied by a delegation of the best young men in the country. I, too, was chosen to go with him on that memorable journey. In the provinces, the subjects had expected to see a powerful, invincible being, a high and mighty god looking down upon them. Instead, the crown prince greeted them humbly as he walked among in public gardens and on their plantations. Priests and religious scholars were invited to convene with him. He denounced their faiths. What god, he asked, is so bloodthirsty that he cannot be worshipped without the sacrifice of human souls? He proclaimed his one God, the only creator of the universe. He told them that God regarded all his creation indiscriminately, with love, peace, and joy. That love was the only law, peace was the ultimate end, and joy was the gratitude offered to the Creator. Everywhere he went, he left behind a whirlwind of confusion and frenzied excitement. I became extremely alarmed. My dear prince, I said, you are pulling out the roots of the empire. He laughed. When will you believe me, master? You have slandered all the religions of our ancestors. Religions we have learned to believe in and respect. Equality, love, peace. All this means nothing to the subjects but an open invitation to rebelliousness and strife." He thought a while, then asked, "Why do wise men like yourself believe so firmly in evil?" "We believe in reality." "Master," he said with a smile, "I will forever dwell in truth." Before we were able to visit all the provinces as planned, a messenger from the palace reached us with the news that the great pharaoh was dead. I recounted the details of the return to Thebes, the grand entombment ceremony, and the crowning of the prince on the throne of Egypt. Akhenaten became King Amenhotep IV, and his wife Nefertiti, the great queen, as was the custom, and the new king inherited his father's harem. Although he treated them kindly, he abstained from any pleasure they offered him. I then told me how Akhenaten summoned the noble men of the country and urged them to join his religion. Thus he was able to select his men from those who declared their faith in the one and only God. May was appointed commander of the armed forces. Haremhab became chief of security. I was chosen for the positions of advisor to the throne. You will hear conflicting reports on why we declared our faith in Akhenaten's God, I told me. But no one knows what the heart really holds. Feelings that I was after the secret of his heart, he told me. I believed in the new God as a deity to be worshipped along with all other deities, but I also believed that everyone should have the freedom to worship whichever god they choose. Akhenaten continued his reform throughout the empire. He reduced taxes and abolished all punitive measures. My king, I advised him, if public servants are no longer afraid of punishment, they will soon become corrupt, and the poor will be their sorry prey. The king shrugged and replied confidently, You are still wavering, and your faith is not strong enough. You will soon see what wonders love can do. My God will never let me down. Meanwhile, relations between the new king and the priests of Amun had become so strained that Akhenaten resolved to build a new city and move the throne. Thus, we moved to Akhenaten, a city of unrivaled beauty. Upon arrival, we held the first prayer in the grand temple that was erected in the center of the city. Nefertiti played the mandolin. She was like a jewel, radiant with young and beauty as she sang. "O, precious Lord, Soul Creator, you fill the universe with thy beauty. There is no love greater than thine." Each passing day was a sweet dream, filled with happiness and love. The blossom of the new religion was growing rapidly in our hearts. But the king did not forget his mission. In the name of love and peace, the pharaoh fought the most ferocious war Egypt had witnessed. He decreed the closing of temples, confiscated all the idols, and erased their names from the monuments. It was then that he changed his name to Akhenaten. Then he toured the country, proclaiming his religion. People received him with amazing love and eagerness. In the past, they had heard about the pharaohs without ever seeing him. But now, the image of Akhenaten and Nefertiti in their public appearances became engraved in their memories forever. But the dream did not last. Clouds of sorrow began to gather, hesitant at first, then quickly they broke like a fierce cataract. There was the death of his second daughter, Akhenaten, the most beautiful and loved one of all of his children. He was consumed with grief and mourned her more than tears had shed in his boyhood after the death of his brother Thutmosis. When he cried out, "Why?" to his God, I suspected he was about to lose his faith. Then we began to receive the news of growing corruption of the public servants and the merchants. The cries of hungry people grew louder. Several regions of the empire were now in a state of mutiny. Our enemies began to attack the borders. Tushratta, king of Mitanni, and our strongest ally, was killed defending the country. We must eradicate all the elements of corruption and send the army to defend our borders, I urged him desperately. Love is my arms and my armor, he said. Unwavering, you must be patient. How can I possibly explain the curious events that transpired? The priest accused the pharaoh of madness. In his last days, some of Akhenaten's men came to share that opinion, although I was admittedly rather confused. I rejected the idea completely. He was neither mad nor sane like the rest of us. He was something in between. I could never understand him. The Queen Mother, T, sent word that she was preparing to visit Akhenaten. Akhenaten was so pleased that he built a palace in the southern quarter of the city, specifically for the occasion, and the reception held in her honor was the most magnificent celebration the city had witnessed. Shortly after her arrival, T asked to see me. It amazed me to show how she had aged beyond her years. She shouted, I came to have a very long talk with my son. But I thought it appropriate to pave the way by consulting you first. I've never neglected my duty as a reliable advisor, I replied. I believe you, she continued. I agree that we must never let go of our heritage. But I do want you to tell me, in all honesty, will you remain loyal to my son regardless of what happens? You must never doubt that, I replied earnestly. What would you do should something arise that relieves you of your duty to the king? I am a member of his family. I would never abandon him. I am grateful, The great queen sighed in relief. The situation is rather dangerous. Do you think the others have such strong faith in him as well? I thought for a while, then responded. I can assure you that some of them, at least, are beyond doubt. I am particularly curious to hear what you have to say about Haremhab. She seemed apprehensive. He is faithful in his duties as chief of security, and has been a friend of the king since they were young lads, I replied without hesitation. It is him who worries me the most, perhaps of the great power at his command. In truth, however, he is loyal to a king of Meri Ra. Like the rest of us, T failed to sway the king from his position. Eventually, she packed her disappointment and returned to Thebes. There, her health deteriorated quickly and passed away, leaving behind the tales of her wonderful life. Resentment escalated in the empire, and the provinces now turned against the king. We became imprisoned in Akhenaten with our one and only god. We were all aware of the impending disaster, except Akhenaten, who was still hopeful. My god will never forsake me, he insisted. Unbeknown to anyone, the high priest of Amun entered Akhenaten. When I learned that he was in the city, I was one of the first to visit him. I was surprised to find him disguised in the garb of a merchant. You wish to conceal your identity? Why? You know that the king brings no harm upon anyone. He ignored my question and commanded, Gather all the king's men and bring them to me. We met with him in the garden of the palace of the late Queen T. He asked us to collaborate with him to avoid bloodshed. He seemed to be speaking to us from a position of power. He talked at length about the wrath of the gods and the fate of the empire. Then he delivered us a severe warning and left. We felt as though a snake had brushed by our feet. I did not know how to interpret his actions. I never trusted him in the first place. I suspected, however, that the high priest did not trust the troops in the provinces to be on his side either. He was afraid, I concluded, of nationwide conflict that would end either in his destruction or, at best, a very costly victory. The threat he faced was no less than that looming over Akhenaten. Nonetheless, if a civil war broke out, all of Egypt would pay the price. When the high priest left, we stayed behind to discuss the situations, hoping to come to a decision. At that point, I had to interrupt him. Which of the king's men were present at that meeting? He squinted, mulling over my question for a while, then continued. I do not recall precisely. It has been a very long time. I do remember, however, that Haremhab and Nacht were there. In any case, Haremhab was the first to speak. I am the king's friend and chief of security, he said. He gazed at us with his honey-colored eyes for a while, then continued in a calm, determined tone. But I believe a settlement is inevitable in this situation. None of us protested. We requested a council convention with the king. We stood before the pharaoh and the queen, saluting the throne and the empire. Akhenaten smiled serenely. Contrary to her usual bright demeanor, Nefertiti was cold and apprehensive. When the formalities concluded, Akhenaten said, I see troubled faces before me. My gracious king, Haremhab started, we were gathered here for the love of Egypt. Everything I do is for the love of Egypt and the entire world, he replied. The country is on the verge of an uncontrollable war. We must do something quickly to save it, before it is completely destroyed, Haremhab continued. What do you recommend? The king asked. Grant the people freedom of worship and send the army to defend the borders of the empire. The king shook his head, adorned with the crown of the two lands, and said, That would mean a return to the darkness of the heathen ways. I have no right to issue any decrees unless the Creator commands me. Your imperial grace, Haremhab continued, you have every right to keep your faith, but you must then renounce the throne. Never will I commit such treachery against my worshipped God. I will not forsake his throne. His eyes gleamed like rays of the sun. Then he shifted his gaze to me, and I felt as though I had been thrown into the netherworld. It is the only way to protect you and your faith, I said. Go in peace, he said sadly. You have some time to reflect on our proposition. As we left the grand hall of the throne, I felt as though needles were prickling my heart mercilessly. That feeling has never left me to this very day. Grave events followed our confrontation with the king. Nefertiti left the royal palace and moved to her private palace in northern Akhenaten. I visited her, not sure of her intentions. I shall not leave my palace until death takes me. She refused to say more. Akhenaten declared his brother, Smekhkare, co-ruler on the throne of the empire. The priest denied Smekhkare and Akhenaten the throne, and entrusted it to Tutankhamun. There was no choice but to yield or to face war. At the end of the period, we gave Akhenaten to consider our consul. Haremhab visited the palace. I will not betray my creator, nor will he forsake me. I will remain firm in my position, even if everyone else leaves, said the pharaoh. My king, Haremhab said, we ask your permission to leave Akhenaten and return to Thebes so that your country may be reunified. Not one of us wishes to leave your city, but we must, if Egypt is to be spared destruction. I will see it too that you are never harmed. Do as you please. Akhenaten was determined, even enthusiastic. I am in no need of anyone's protection. God is on my side, and he shall not forsake me. We carried out our orders and left Akhenaten weighed down with sadness. Soon after, the citizens did likewise, until there was no one left but Akhenaten in his palace, Nefertiti in hers, and the few guards and slaves. Akhenaten, who had never been sick since childhood, fell ill and died alone. I learned that even in the throes of death, he prayed to his God. You create the germ of life, within a woman, the seed of man. You grant us the bounty of living before we see the light of your land. Should you choose to cease your giving, the earth shall be in darkness, in the silence of death. I was silent. When he recovered from the memories that overwhelmed him, he turned towards me. His eyes filled with compassion and said, This is the story of Akhenaten, the pharaoh, whose only name today is the heretic. I cannot deny the woes he had brought upon the country. Egypt lost its empire and was torn by conflict, but I must admit I cannot rid my heart of his love, nor can I stop admiring him. Let the final word be that of Osiris, the ruler of eternal life, before whom we shall stand to be judged. As I left the palace of the sage, it occurred to me that the final word of I will not be pronounced until he too stands before Osiris. Haremhab. Haremhab was well-built, moderately tall, with a strong, trustworthy demeanor. He was a descendant of an old religious family from Memphis, a family that had produced renowned physicians, priests, and army officials. Haremhab's father was the first in his family to be elevated to the ruling class when he was appointed chief of horsemen during the life of Amenhotep III. Haremhab was the only one of Akhenaten's men who kept his position as chief of security in the new era. His main duty at that time was to eradicate the corruption that had spread in the country and to restore peace. He was so successful that in the critical period of transition from Akhenaten's rule, Haremhab was regarded as a hero. The high priest of Amun gave him a glowing testimony, and I, the sage, confirmed it. He received me in the visitors' hall by the palace garden. Akhenaten was my companion and friend from boyhood, long before he was my king. From the time I first knew him until we parted, he thought of nothing but religion. I gave him the respect that was due to him from the beginning, for I was raised to worship duty and to place everything in that context, regardless of any personal emotions or attachments. Akhenaten was the crown prince. I was one of his subjects. I owed him respect. In my heart, however, I despised him for his weakness and his feminine appearance. I could not picture myself a friend of his, but the fact is, he won me and I became his true friend. I still wonder how it all happened. Perhaps I was unable to resist his tender, delicate emotions and his charm. He possessed an amazing ability to capture people's hearts. He even had the entire country applaud him as he called upon them to renounce the deities of their forefathers. Akhenaten and I were opposites, but that did not stop us from developing a very firm friendship that withstood several trials, until finally it was crushed by a mountain of contradiction. I can still see his smile as he said, "Haremhab, my bloodthirsty, monstrous friend, I love you." I searched in vain for something that we might have in common. I invited him several times to join me in my favorite sport, hunting. He would always reply, "Beware and do not defile the loving heart of nature." He disliked military training, even the uniform. One time, he stared at my helmet and my sword and said, "Is it not strange that decent people like yourself are trained to become professional executioners? What would your great-grandfather, Tutmosis III, say if he heard you?" "My great-grandfather," he cried. "He established his greatness on a pyramid of poor people's corpses. Did you not see his picture on the walls of the temples, making offerings of slaves to Amun? What great-grandfather? What bloodthirsty god?" His strange ideas, I thought, may not stand in the way of his friendships, but what would happen if he took them to the throne? I was unable to imagine him as a pharaoh. Like all the great pharaohs of Egypt, my feeling never changed, even during the merriest and most blissful times. Indeed, during those times he seemed even further from the gravity and glory of the pharaohs. Once during his father's rule, I was deputed to discipline some rebels in a far corner of the empire. I sat out in charge of an armed raid for the first time. My mission was carried out successfully and I returned with plenty of loot and captives. King Amenhotep III was oppressed and honored me generously. When the prince congratulated me on my safe return, I invited him to see the captives. They stood before him shackled and half naked. As he gazed at them, their eyes begged for sympathy, as if they sensed his weakness. A cloud of gloom came over his face. "Rest in peace," he said tenderly. "You shall not be harmed." I became quite agitated, as for I had vowed to punish them severely until they were willing to renounce chaos and submit to order. "Haremhab," he asked as we left together, "are you proud of what you did?" "My prince," I replied, "I've earned this pride." "What a pity," he mumbled, then continued teasingly, "You are just a sophisticated bandit." That was Akhenaten, the crowned prince, who would in time take the throne and rule the empire. Nonetheless, I was intrigued and craved more of the strange fruit of his mind. It never affected my own ideas, though. It was like listening to a voice from another world, intriguing yet incomprehensible. How did we become friends? How did my heart become filled with love for him? These are questions I cannot answer. I recall a discussion we had about religion one time. We were resting near his private place in the palace garden. "Haremhab," he asked, "why do you pray in the temple of Amun?" I was taken aback. I had no answer that would satisfy him or me. I remained silent. "Do you really believe in Amun and all you were taught about him?" I thought about that question for a short while, then replied, "Not in the same way that other people believe in him. Either you believe or you do not. There is no middle way. I only care about religion as one of the oldest traditions in Egypt," I said in all honesty. "You worshipped only yourself, Haremhab. he said with provoking confidence. Let us say that I worship Egypt. Have you ever been tempted to ask what is the secret of life and existence? I know how to eliminate such temptations when they arise, I replied. How unfortunate. And what have you done for your soul then? Duty is what I hold sacred. I was growing weary of his pressing questions, and I have built myself a tomb for the thereafter. He sighed. I hope one day you will savor the sweetness of intimacy. Intimacy? Intimacy with the one creator of the universe. Why one creator only? I questioned, somewhat impassive. Because he is too great to have an equal, he replied sincerely. Akhenaten, a feeble shadow wandering aimlessly in the palace garden, flirting with flowers and birds, singing like a girl. I could swear he was meant to be born female, and at the last minute nature changed course. A grave misfortune for Egypt. The first time Nefertiti made an appearance in the royal palace was in the Sed festival, the 13th jubilee of the pharaoh's reign. She stunned everyone with her beauty and spirit. She danced with the daughters of the honorables and charmed all of us with her sinuous voice. O brother of mine, come to the sweet spring. Watch me as I bathe before your eyes, my flowing robe, wet, clinging, lustrous under the light. Come watch me, brother of mine. Her parents, Ai and Te, must have prepared her for such an impressive display. They had paved the way for her to sit on the throne of Egypt. Bear in mind that I was the crown prince's teacher. No doubt he had every chance to influence Akhenaten's shaky character, and to lead him by the hand to the snare that he had set with his daughter. In any event, Nefertiti won the affection of both the prince and his mother at the Sed festival. Not too long after, she was married to the crown prince. During the wedding celebrations, the highest priest of Amun said to me, perhaps in his marriage the priest will mature and put aside his foolish ideas. A common woman like her, I replied, pointing at Nefertiti, probably never dreamed of the throne. She will not jeopardize it by angering her husband. I have often wondered if she would have taken him as her husband if he was not the crown prince. You see, it is hard to imagine Akhenaten as the knight of any girl's dream, even if she was a simple peasant. Marriage did not calm him. On the contrary, he became more defiant. In time, I learned about his peculiar claim, a new god, revealed to him through a voice and no vision. The future, I thought then, would be grim. After a while, news came that Amenhotep III was so angry with the prince that he had sent him to a long tour of the empire. Haremhab went on to tell me in detail about Akhenaten's talks with people of the empire, when he called on them to join his new religion and promised them love and joy and equal treatment. He added nothing to what I had heard from Ai. Despite our friendship and my loyalty to the prince, I wished then, for the first time, to kill him with my own sword before he drowned us all in his destruction. You must understand, however, that my desire to kill him was not at all inspired by spite. Amenhotep III died, and the prince was summoned to the throne. When he became pharaoh, he invited all his men to join his new religion. Then it was my turn. Haremhab, he said, those who will cooperate with me must declare their faith in the one and only. My dear pharaoh, you know my position regarding all gods and religions. Nevertheless, I am a man of duty and a servant of the throne. I therefore declare my faith in the one and only out of loyalty to your throne and to the country. He smiled. That should be enough for the time being. I do not wish my palace to be without you. Perhaps one day you will be blessed with the true faith. So I started a new life in the service of a new god and a new king. I served then with a loyalty drawn only from my sense of duty, but I must admit that the king revealed new powers I was not aware he possessed. Despite his physical feebleness and his feminine appearance, he challenged everything that came his way. He fought against the most powerful and resourceful men, the priests. He destroyed the old traditions that had been rooted in our country for hundreds of years. He even fought sorcery and potent witchcraft,
Nefertiti, too, revealed herself to be a true queen, as if she had been born with the sole purpose of emulating the greatness of Ti and Hatshepsut. She was the one who ran the affairs of the kingdom, while the king devoted his time to his religious calling. Unfortunately, Nefertiti seemed to believe in the new religion. So much has been said about this woman, and I despise heresy, but I must admit that her faith remained a mystery that needs to be solved. Sometimes I did not doubt that she was a true believer. At other times, I could not fathom her. Did she feign piousness to strengthen her position as queen? Did she mean to encourage her husband to become more immersed in religion so that she would become the sole ruler of the land and the subjects? Was she merely a tool in her father's hand for some mysterious scheme? The priests tried to warn her, but she did not respond to them, with the result of their concern turned it to spite. They were convinced that Akhenaten was weak, and they could not imagine that he was capable of challenging them. Because of that, they accused Ti of being the source of his ideas, and blamed his stubbornness and persistence on Nefertiti. That, I believe, is nonsense. They can point their fingers at whoever they want, but I have no doubt that this foolishness was the product of Akhenaten's own mind. By moving to the new capital, Akhenaten declared war on all the deities. He became a missionary, preaching his religion throughout the provinces. We so much enjoyed the blissful days of victory and peace that I imagined that his young, feeble king was capable of demolishing the structure of life as we had always known it, and building it anew according to his designs. I followed in awe his eloquent conquests of the provinces, and the frenzy with which the people received him. I felt that a new kind of power had possessed him, and that he excelled in exercising it. But at the back of my mind, there was always a hint of doubt that this new world that was being created so quickly could last. Could order be achieved by the exercise of love alone? What were we supposed to make of then of what we had experienced in the long life of our country? On one occasion, Nefertiti said to me, as if she could read my thoughts, "He is inspired. God has blessed him with the divine love. We shall be victorious, and God will be by our side." One time I sat alone with the minister Nacht, casually drinking wine. I believed, and still do, that Nacht was a persuasive politician. I asked him, "Do you really believe in the one and only, the God of love and peace?" "Yes," he replied calmly, "but I don't support the seizure of other deities." I was relieved. A compromise, then. Did you consult the king? "Yes, he thought it heresy. And Nefertiti? She speaks his tongue now," he said sorrowfully. Then Haremhab told me how peace and happiness eventually turned to a promise of destruction. Again, he did not add to what the high priest or I had already told me. At that point, I tried to advise Akhenaten. "We must change our policy," I said, but he rejected every proposition I made that hinted of any compromise. The challenge seemed to inspire him even more. "We must go ahead with our holy war until the very end," he said. "There shall be no other end but victory." Then he patted my shoulder gently and continued, "You must not share with the wretched ones their love of misery." When the condition of the country continued to deteriorate, I wished once more that I could kill him. This time out of love and loyalty. It became clear that what I thought was an incredible power in his feeble body was in reality a raging madness that would be curbed. The Queen Mother visited us when things were at their worst, and summoned me to her palace in the southern quarters of Akhenaten. "Perhaps you will succeed where we have failed," I said. She stared at me intently, then asked, "I trust you have advised the pharaoh of the changes you thought necessary to rectify the situation." I have heard now Ti interpreted any hesitation preceding an answer, so I replied quickly. I suggested, "Your Majesty, a change in the country's home and foreign policies." She seemed relieved. "This is what I expect from a loyal man like you, Haremhab. He is my king and my friend, as you know, Your Highness." "Will you promise me, Haremhab, to remain loyal under any circumstances?" she asked, gazing straight into my eyes. I thought quickly and replied, "I promise you my loyalty regardless of the circumstances." It was clear that she was relieved. They are asking for his head. You have the power to keep him safe from harm. Sooner or later, they will try to draw you to their side. I repeated my promise to remain truthful and loyal to the king. Indeed, I kept my promise. To abandon him in Akhenaten was the only way to protect him. T failed to dissuade him. Despite all her powers of persuasion, she left Akhenaten to die with her fears. When the grip tightened on the city, I was certain beyond doubt that the new god was incapable of defending himself, let alone his beloved chosen king. We drank the bitterness of isolation, and death loomed over and around us. Yet the pharaoh did not waver. If anything, he seemed more determined. The flame of his spirit refused to die. My God will never let me down, he continued to say. Whenever I saw his face glowing with confidence, intoxicated, I became more certain that he was afflicted with insanity. It might have appeared a religious battle on the surface, but in truth, it was sheer madness raging in the mind of a man born with the halo of perversity. Then there was the visit of the high priest of Amun and his last warning to us. He grasped my hand firmly and said, Haremhab, you are a man of many merits. Relieve your conscience of its burden and do what is expected of a man in your position. To tell you the truth, I admired the man for rising above any desire to avenge himself, and for his attempt to spare the country more woes. We asked to meet with the king. It was a difficult, painful, sad meeting. It was as if we were shrugging off our loyalty to a man who knew nothing but love, a man who created a wonderful dream from the sparks of madness and wanted nothing more than to share it with us. I advised him to decree freedom of worship and initiate an immediate plan to defend the empire from the attacks of the enemies on the border. When he refused, I suggested that he relinquish his obligations as a pharaoh and devote his time to the religious calling. We gave him time to consider our counsel. Then he appointed Smenkakare, a co-ruler on the throne, and although Nefertiti left him, he still persisted. We therefore decided to abandon him and make peace with his enemies to preserve the unity of the country. We made this decision only after agreeing that no one should harm him or his wife. I gave the oath before the new king, Tutankhamun. That was the last episode in the greatest tragedy of Egypt's history. You see what madness has done to our country? Haremhab and I embraced the silence that usually accompanies endings. I began to gather my papers to get ready to leave. Then it occurred to me to ask, why do you think she left him? Nefertiti, I mean. He replied without hesitation. She must have realized that his madness was now jeopardizing her own life, so she left his palace to save herself. But why would she stay in the city? Why not leave Akhenaten with the rest of you? He replied scornfully. She was sure the priest considered her equally culpable in her husband's crimes. As I shook his hand to bid him farewell, I said, how did he die? His natural weakness made him incapable of bearing the defeat. His faith was shaken when his god forsook him. He fell ill for a few days and died. How did you receive the news of his death, Commander? I asked after some hesitation. I have said all I have to say, he replied stonily. Beck. I met Beck, the sculptor, in his house on one of his islands of the Nile 2 miles south of Thebes. He lived in virtual isolation in a small but elegant house in the center of his modest farm. Beck was widely known to have excelled in his vocation above any other sculptor, but when our country was being rebuilt after the wars, he was not summoned to participate as were many others of his standing. Beck was known for his loyalty to the former king, Akhenaten. In fact, he was occasionally accused of being a heretic himself. Now he was almost 40 years old, a strong, dark man, tall, slender, and full of energy, but his gaze was overcast by melancholy. He greeted me with a warm smile as he opened the letter that my father had given me. When he finished reading, he began. Beauty and peace vanished when Akhenaten left our world, and I no longer find pleasure in color or music. I first knew him when I was still a young boy, learning the basics of my vocation at the school of my father. Men, the sculptor of King Amenhotep III. One day, a young boy, carried on a sedan chair, visited us at school. My father whispered to me, "The Crown Prince." I saw a lad of my own age, then, frail, unassuming, but with a piercing look. He seemed fascinated by the mere encounter of the chisel and the rock, as though it were a miracle. He came to watch and learn, and he engaged us in conversation with such friendliness that we soon forgot he was a member of the pharaoh's family. He continued to visit the school regularly, and we became friends. I was extremely happy with our friendship. My father took pride in our acquaintance and granted us his blessing. "Akhenaten is a young boy with the wisdom of a man, my son," my father would say. Indeed he was. Even the high priest of Amun acknowledged his wisdom and his maturity at such an early age. The priests interpreted it as an evil force that had taken hold of Akhenaten. That was not true. Amun, the evil force dwelt in the hearts of his priests. My king knew no evil. Perhaps that was his tragedy. Once, when we were young men, my father was absorbed in carving a sculpture for King Amenhotep III, and Akhenaten was watching him as he worked with his assistants. "Master Men," Akhenaten said, "you insist on all these traditional methods. I find them stifling." "Tradition is power, Your Highness. With tradition, we can overcome the passage of time," my father answered with pride. "Every sunrise brings a new kind of beauty," Akhenaten said ecstatically. Then he turned to me, "Beck, my friend, this sculpture may be beautiful, but it will not be truthful. Where is the truth?" Akhenaten lived for the truth, and because of the truth, he died. From a very young age, his soul was inspired with all that was mystical, as though he had been born from the womb of spirituality. He said to me once, "I am very fond of you, Beck. If you master your art, I will entrust you to all matters of art and aesthetics when I become king." Truth is that I owe Akhenaten everything, religion and art together. First, he taught me the religion of Aten. Then he showed me the path of the one God. I was filled with peace when I heard him recite with faith and love. "The land is bright with thy light, and is no more in darkness. O Lord, Master of the universe, of heaven and earth, of man and animal, O our Creator." One day, as we were walking from the quarry to school, I said, "My prince, I believe in your God." He was overjoyed. "You are the second believer after Mary Ra, but our enemies will be plentiful." I learned later that Nefertiti had joined the faith at the time. While she was still at her father's palace, Akhenaten used to talk to me occasionally about the difficulties he faced because of his religion. Despite my isolation in the quarry, I was able to acquire some understanding of the events that transpired. It was from my father that I had learned the fundamentals of my vocation. But Akhenaten gave me the spirit. He committed himself to the truth, both in life and in art. Because of that, he provoked those who lived only for his transient life, those who swarmed around every banquet like vultures and crows. "Beck," he told me once, "do not let your teachings of the dead shackle your hands when you work. Let your stone be the harbor for truth. It is God who created everything, so be loyal to him in your representations. Do not allow fear or greed to influence your work. When you make a sculpture of me, let it show every flaw on my face and body, so that the beauty of your work will be in its honesty." That was Akhenaten, who rejected the old ways and was fascinated by novelty. He renounced the idols and pulled out the time-worn tradition by the root. Akhenaten found ecstasy in truth. When he became king, I declared my faith again before him, and he appointed me first sculptor of the king. When God inspired him to build the new city and move his throne to it, I was in charge of 80,000 workers, building the most beautiful city ever known, the city of light and faith, Akhenaten. We built the largest roads, the finest palaces, and the most beautiful of gardens and ponds. It was an artist's masterpiece, but in the end, it fell prey to the malice of the priests. Beck remained silent for a while, unable to conceal his grief for most of his cherished creation. which was now slowly vanishing into the dust of the earth. I, too, remained silent out of respect for him, until finally he continued. Akhenaten was an artist himself. He recited poetry, painted, and even tried his slender hand at carving stone. I will tell you a secret that few people know. He carved a sculpture of Nefertiti that was by all standards an ideal of beauty. It may still be in the abandoned palace, or in Nefertiti's palace, or perhaps it was destroyed with everything else. When the queen abandoned him unexpectedly, he took out the left eye of the sculpture to express his disappointment, but left the rest of it intact as a token of eternal love. The queen and Akhenaten were a symbol of the god who was father and mother in one. They were united by a deep love that weathered many storms. I still do not understand why she left him at the very end. Her enemies accused her of leaving the sinking ship. They said she wanted to find herself a place in the new nation, but she did not try to win anyone over after that. Of her own will, she remained isolated in her palace until it became her prison. It was not true that she had been nursing her own interest. I believe that her faith might have been shaken when God did not come to their aid at the time of those painful events. In a dark hour, she deserted both the throne and her religion. As for Akhenaten, he was determined until the end. How could he give up his faith when it was he who had heard the heavenly voice of God call him his dear son? After that, Akhenaten could not hear any other voice, nor did he care for any other opinion or listen to anyone's advice as a person should when he seeks the truth. It was not he who was defeated, but us. I, too, had my doubts, particularly when they asked him to relinquish the throne, and even more when everyone abandoned him. I saw him once standing alone, calmly watching everyone leave. When he saw me approach, he said, "You must go with them, Beck." "No one dared to speak of this, my king," I said agitatedly. "But you will go," he replied with a smile. "I remain by my king forever." "Beck," he said gently, "you will go, whether willingly or by force." I remained silent for a moment, then asked, "My master, can evil overcome?" He seemed to disappear in his thoughts for a moment. Then I heard him say, "Evil can never overcome. What we are witnessing is only a fleeting moment. Only death can keep us from seeing the truth." Then he began to sing a song. "You dwell within me, my lord. No other has known you. But your son, Akhenaten, you inspire me with your knowledge. You are the power of creation." In the same way that he never gave up his faith, he never stopped loving either. Even when he saw the pyramid he built destroyed, and saw his own men join his enemies and his beloved wife desert him without explanation, even then his heart did not know a moment of hatred or spite. He was above punishment. He had nothing but love for man, animal, and even inanimate matter. When he first took the throne, Egypt was a vast empire with loving, obedient subjects. He could have chosen to indulge in worldly comforts, women, wine, food, but he looked away from such temptations and gave himself to the truth, challenging the powers of greed and selfishness. So he sacrificed everything, without ever losing the smile on his face. "Why don't you use force to defend love and peace?" I asked him one day after the seeds of evil had started growing. He replied, "Vicious people and criminals always find an excuse to justify their thirst of blood, and I am not one of those, Beck." I will never forget his kindness when he sensed that I liked Mutenjamet, his sister-in-law. He tried to pave the way for me to ask her hand in marriage. When she refused me, he consoled me. "Do not be sorry. She is like a vulture waiting for a chance to strike." I asked him what he meant, but he did not answer. When everyone else had left, I insisted on remaining with him, as did Mary Ra, the priest of the one God. But the sage Ai met with us and said, "We are only leaving to protect him from an attack that we cannot ward off. It is the only way we can save his life. Believe me, if anyone was to remain with him, I would have chosen to be that one. I am the father of his wife and his first teacher. But I, My staying with him will not change the course of events anyhow. The agreement between us and the priest was that Akhenaten would not be harmed, on the condition that none of his followers and men remain in the city with him. The priest will assign a few servants to watch over him. My heart was seared with pain as I was forced to join everyone else. I still have doubts, for I, too, cannot understand why God abandoned him. Sometimes I pray to God, and sometimes not. When I received the news of his death, I wept until my eyes exhausted their tears. I had a deep feeling that he did not just die, but that they killed him by sorcery or in some other brutal way. Now, here I am living without purpose or a trace of happiness, waiting for death to take me, as it took my beautiful city. Tadukhipa. Tadukhipa was the daughter of Tushratta, the king of Mitanni, Egypt's closest ally. At the end of his life, King Amenhotep III married Tadukhipa. He was 60 years old, and she was 15. When Amenhotep died and Akhenaten became king, he inherited Tadukhipa as part of his father's harem. Now she lives in a palace in northern Thebes with 300 slaves in her service. She agreed to speak to me only on the recommendation of Haremhab. She was a beautiful woman, in her 30s, with an aura of mystery and dignity. I met her in the grand reception room, where she was settled on a chair of ebony inlaid with gold. Her smile encouraged me to ask her to tell a story. I lived with King Amenhotep III for a very short period, a period filled with jealousy and bitterness. When I met the great Queen Tiyi, I was rather surprised. I could not understand how a woman like her was able to rise to such status. In my father's palace, like the likes of Tiyi, were more than happy to serve in his harem. I was even more surprised when I first saw the crown prince walking in the garden. What a wasted and hideous creature he was. I felt more contempt than pity for him. Soon after my marriage to Amenhotep III, his health began to deteriorate. Some spiteful people dared to blame me for the king's ill health. My concerns, however, were different. From the very first night of our marriage, I could see in the king's wrinkled face my imminent misfortune. That wretched boy would soon take me as a part of his inheritance. I found myself thinking that the life with his old father was probably better than the life with him. After all, Amenhotep III, despite what one might expect of an ailing man his age, was lively, cheerful, and full of vigor. In the harem quarters, the women often talked about the crown prince. We amused ourselves by making fun of his passion for feminine art forms, like painting and singing, and his dubious disinterest in women. We thought he was quite unfit for the throne. Soon the news arrived about his obsession with a new religion, and the trouble this was causing his parents. We heard that the priests of Amun were alarmed. We were curious about all this, but really, it had very little effect on us. In the harem, the daily concerns of women came before the country. It was only the king's death that shook us and threw us into a quandary we did not know how to escape. The loathsome creature was crowned king and shared us the throne with Nefertiti, whom he had married when his father was still alive. And yes, we all became his possession. It is true that he was very generous in the care he provided us, but he kept us like tamed animals without once coming near any of us. As a result of his neglect, the women soon engaged in perverse relations to gratify their desires. Why doesn't he pay attention to us instead of those religious foods, with the priests and everyone else? One of the women asked. He must be impotent. Why else would he bother with all that religious nonsense? Another replied. Nevertheless, Nefertiti was very jealous and decided to pay a visit to the harem. The woman rightly guessed her real motive. Nefertiti wanted to see me, because she had heard in the palace that I was young and beautiful. I was the only one in the harem who was close to her in age, and just as beautiful. Indeed, I was of rather better descent. I was the daughter of a king, while her father, I, was just a commoner. I was one of the first to declare the faith in the new religion. Later, when Akhenaten's sun was setting, he was the first to abandon him and join his enemies. In any event, the new queen came to the harem surrounded by slave girls. She greeted us, one woman after the other, in order of seniority. When it was my turn, and I was the last, she looked at me with piercing eyes, full of curiosity. I stood before her defiantly until her face grew somber. I was not surprised to hear that she was furious at the queen mother for advising her son to pay attention to his duties towards his harem, and especially to me, the daughter of Tushratta, Egypt's friend and ally. Indeed, Nefertiti did not forgive Ti for pressuring Akhenaten in this way. She became even more enraged when the king yielded to his mother's will and decided to pay me a visit. I waited for Akhenaten, as instructed, in my room on my gold-inlaid bed. Completely naked, in all my beauty, he arrived wearing only a short loincloth, and sat on the edge of the bed, smiling softly. "Would it make you happy to bear me a child?" he whispered. I tried to ignore the feelings of disgust that came over me. "It is my duty, your highness. But it is love I am after." There was a look of desperation in his eyes. "Love is my only duty." "Is it love that inspires your desire for me, master? Forgive me." He stroked the back of my hand tenderly, kissed me on the forehead, then left the room as calmly as he had entered. I did not tell anyone what had happened in my room that night, and most of the women in the harem thought that Nefertiti had lost at least half of the king's heart. Days passed, and we continued to receive news of events outside the palace. Then we heard about the king's decision to build a new city, and in the matter of a few days, we moved to Akhenaten. In the new city, everyone was happy but us. We were cast off in a remote quarter of the palace, where we lived an unbearable and utterly degrading life that bred further perversity. When it became known that the idiot king wanted to fight sin with love instead of punishment, those in the harem who had not resorted to sleeping with other women had no qualms about inviting the palace guards to their beds. The moral system fell apart. Nevertheless, the king's only concern was to spread his new religion in the provinces. All the women around me began to pray to the one and only God. Without true belief, Akhenaten's religion, I thought then, was the only religion without believers. I still think his religion created a nation of hypocrites and people greedy for power and wealth. I just could not fathom how this vast universe could have only one God. Why, every city needs a God to look after its affairs. Every human activity requires a God that knows about it. Besides, how could people relate to each other with love only? What nonsense! His mother must have spoilt him completely for him to be so irrational. He often recited poetry in front of large audiences. Then his wife would sing. The sacred throne was overtaken by a mob of rascal poets and singers, and the dignity of the pharaohs was shattered. What followed was inevitable. Misery was everywhere, like a long night promising no dawn. Disasters hailed on the country and the whole empire. My father was one of the few allies who remained loyal to Egypt during those frightful times, until finally he was killed in battle, defending an idiot king. Some people thought the problem was that Akhenaten was a noble poet misplaced on the throne by a twist of fate, but the truth is that he was a strange creature, neither man nor woman, driven by shame and stigma to destroy himself and the country. He wanted to hold up love as a beacon for everyone. Instead, enmity and malice spread like fire in people's hearts, and his empire was extinguished. As for his cunning wife, Nefertiti, she only went along with this nonsense in the hope of having exclusive access to authority, and to gratify her unstable lust with as many men as she desired. Nefertiti managed to convince everyone that she and her husband were a model of love and fidelity. They would actually kiss before their subjects on the streets of Akhenaten and at the provincial conventions. But it was a well-known fact among the women in the palace that the king and his wife never slept together. Akhenaten was incapable of such things with women. Nefertiti had relationships with the sculptor Bek, the general Haremhab, May, and many others, which is how she got her 6 daughters. There were rumors among the slave girls that the only sexual relation Akhenaten ever had was with his mother, Queen Ti. Tadukhipa must have noticed my confusion, for she observed me silently for some time. Then she continued. It was known in the harem that Ti bore him a daughter. That was an unquestionable fact. More than one slave girl testified that she had seen Akhenaten and Ti having sex. Certainly, it was no secret to Nefertiti, which is why the two women despised each other. The problem was that most other people could not imagine how this man who caused so much tumult in the world was in essence such a worthless, despicable being. That, however, is the truth that must be known and recorded in history. If Akhenaten had not been born in one of the greatest families in history, he would have lived a low life in the alleys of Thebes, slavering like a madman, an object of children's mockery. No wonder, then, that the empire collapsed during his reign. As for Nefertiti, if it had not been for Akhenaten, she would have been a professional whore. A short while before the tragedy ended, the queen mother came to Akhenaten hoping to save the ship from sinking. There was a fierce argument between Ti and Nefertiti. Nefertiti accused Ti of collaborating with the enemies of the throne. Akhenaten was deeply pained by his wife's accusation and defended his mother, or his lover, I should say, vehemently. That, of course, angered Nefertiti, but she kept it to herself, and then took her revenge by leaving him at the critical moment with no explanation whatsoever. Then she tried to gain the friendship of the priests to secure herself a place in the new era. Perhaps she even aspired to be the wife of Tutankhamun. But all her attempts were futile, and if it had not been for the sway of her lover, Haremhab, the priests would have ripped her to pieces. Tadukhipa was silent for a moment. Then she concluded, with a scornful smile. This is the story of the imbecile king, Akhenaten, and his absurd religion.